Bob Gates has always got good press as a classy guy here in Washington. So media folks were stunned when the former defense secretary's memoir called Duty came out, not just because it contained harsh criticism of President Obama, who kept him on from the Bush cabinet, but because of the confidential conversations that immediately became news.
Robert Gates is harshly questioning President Obama's leadership and commitment to the Afghanistan war from the start of the surge he ordered.
An act of betrayal or an act of emotion? If he was so seething and so angry during all those years, why did he stay?
Britt, is there something disturbing about a former presidential advisor revealing private conversations in order to sell books?
Yes. Well, you can say it's in order to sell books or simply it's the truth. Obviously, this is a long book, what, 694 pages, something like that? There's a lot in it that's favorable about President Obama, but there's a lot of confidential conversations or conversations which I think that the people involved would have had a reasonable expectation of privacy, as the Supreme Court describes it. And these things are now revealed. Something may be lost there. Something may be lost in terms of the candor with which aides around a president or feel they can comfortably speak. So
right, because how can a president conduct, war and peace sensitive conversations if he thinks that people are gathering material for a bestseller?
Exactly right. I mean, and the other question is the one that you heard Barbara Starr raising, which occurred to me immediately when the book hit, which is if he felt this strongly and thought things were being managed this badly, and that the process was this dysfunctional, then why did he stay on? Now, toward the end of the Bush years, I knew from talking to him that he was dying to leave. I mean, he stayed on very reluctantly. So it's not surprising he was having an unpleasant experience, and what he describes in the book suggests why it became even more unpleasant.
Right.
But no, something's lost there.
I want to be clear. Robert Gates says
doesn't make it less true, however.
Right. I'm not questioning the veracity, and Gates has every right to speak his mind about war policy and what he thinks of the president. But this business about the private conversations and the criticism that he says in the book that he did not make at the time. He was angry about the budget and the way the White House was stealing authority from the Pentagon, an age-old problem. He seems to have saved a lot of this for the tell-all.
Yeah, it certainly seems like it's poor form because he was a guy that everybody sort of revered as a really fair and honorable guy here in town. I think in his defense, if one can be made here, it's that I think the excerpts may be being played rather more harshly than he intends to. That's certainly what he says. And I think it's because basically most of us have really seen are the excerpts, and in particular Bob Woodward's portrayal of that in my paper. And I think that really set the tone for a lot of the coverage. And in fact, he may be a little more on the one hand, on the other hand, nuanced than he's being portrayed.
That may be true, but the idea of putting out in excerpts the juiciest stuff, the revealing anecdotes, something that makes somebody look bad, that's a pretty old game.
It is,
when it comes to selling books.
I find it gets boring. You read the actual book and all the juicy stuff is already out there and you just have the B matter. And I think that's, PR people have to choose what they're going to do and how they're going to sell it. But I'm done with it.
You don't want to read the book?
I don't, right. I've heard it all.
And in fairness, although I always saw Gates as a guy, because he worked for both Republican and Democratic presidents, who was above politics, he is hardly the first one to write such a book.
No, George Stephanopoulos, Scott McClellan, Paul O'Neill, they have all done this. But my point, my question to you, Howie, is does it affect the long-term reputation of the person who's being written about? And I say no.
Well, here was Stephanopoulos going back to the Clinton years, leaves after the first term and writes, of course, in the wake of Monica Lewinsky and the impeachment drama, that Bill Clinton was not fit to be president. He was selfish. He was self-destructive.
And who remembers that now, right? Clinton is an elder statesman right now, head of GCI, and people don't remember that. George Stephanopoulos is now the Good Morning America anchor. It didn't really make a difference. It did at the time, and maybe others can argue against that, but it doesn't now.
But does this have the potential to tarnish at least a little bit Gates' own reputation?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think as much on the question as whether he should have written the book at all at this stage as on the question of why he stayed. I think that the question of whether he should have written the book doesn't really go to veracity. The question of why he stayed goes to character with him.
In the book, he says he came close to quitting at one point.
I know. But he didn't, and that question hangs in the air.
Right. But naturally, the press has pounced on these anecdotes like Hillary Clinton, according to Gates, saying in a private conversation that she opposed George W. Bush's surge in Iraq in 2007 because of the presidential campaign she was about to mount against Barack Obama.
Right, and you know that's going to keep coming up in her presidential campaign, just like Christie's bridge.
So is it a public service? Is it a public service that Gates put this out there, betrayal or not?
Well, it probably did himself a disservice, but I think all information to get out there is
That's exactly the point. I mean, the truth of the matter is that there's no real contradiction between the questions that go to whether a president can expect candidate advice and so on, and the fact that the public is served by having this information about the president, which, you know, is backed by certain facts about the way the president did things, particularly on Afghanistan.
Right.
No sense that he was half-hearted about it. He was doing, which is when you think about it, it is really a damning charge.
We'll look forward to receiving the book and his 47 TV interviews promoting the book. Britt Hume, Dana Milbanks, thanks very much for coming by this Sunday morning. Up next, Dennis Rodman loses it on the air and the media wallow in his North Korean antics. And later, why television is out of tricks, at least when it comes to your living room set.